As a doctor, my patients have often told me the same health myths over and over again, and many of them just persist stubbornly. And today I'm going to explain what's really behind them. Myth number 1. Cold makes you sick. Many people actually believe that drafts, wet hair, or winter cold automatically make you sick. But no, that's not true. You only catch a cold if you get infected with viruses or sometimes bacteria, but most of the time it's viruses. Cold alone definitely does not make you sick. But if your immune system is already weakened and you also catch a chill, for example, because you have cold feet or go out into the cold with wet hair, then your body just has to work twice as hard. It then fights both the viruses and the cold at the same time. And that can actually cause your immune system to give up more quickly. And in the end, you catch a cold more easily. Because often a cold is also the body's emergency brake. It forces you to rest and keep yourself warm. We all prefer to go to bed then, ideally with a hot water bottle, warm socks, and we don't want to hear or see anything. You also really want to drink a lot. And that's the way you naturally get healthy again. So, myth number 2, I inherited this from my parents' genes, so your destiny is determined by them. That's another myth. My mother has diabetes or high blood pressure, so I'll get it too. So many patients have always told me that. My mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, they all had what I have now. But can I say something here? That's not true, that's wrong, it's nonsense. Of course, there is a genetic predisposition, but whether these genes you have are activated or not depends very much on your lifestyle. Nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep. Yes, even your thoughts and feelings influence whether the healthy or the disease-causing genes become active. Today we know that at least 80% of our health is in our own hands, even though diseases tend to run in families. What actually happens is often due to the fact that lifestyle habits are passed down, such as eating styles, patterns of movement or laziness, and maybe even certain beliefs. But genes are not a one-way street, they're more like switches, and you decide which switches you use and in which direction they go. Now comes myth number 3, dementia cannot be influenced. Oh my, many people are actually afraid that dementia is unavoidable if it runs in the family, but that's not true here either. Of course, there are genes that can play a role, but as I mentioned earlier, whether they are activated depends a lot on your lifestyle. And even if dementia already exists, there is still a lot you can do. Studies show that with a plant-based diet, thorough chewing, clean eating, exercise, breathing exercises, and mental activity, you can influence and slow down the progression. And a loving environment is just as important because care, security, and a sense of purpose have a direct effect on your brain. That means dementia is not a rigid special condition, but rather you can have a positive influence on its progression, and of course, as prevention, you can do exactly the things I just mentioned. Now comes the myth that milk is important for strong bones. This myth is particularly persistent. Milk provides calcium and prevents osteoporosis. Sounds logical, but it's wrong. Milk does contain calcium, but at the same time, it is considered an acid-forming food, especially the products made from milk. And to balance the acid-base levels in the body, calcium is mobilized from the bones. And that means in the end, there is often no gain, but on the contrary, a higher risk of osteoporosis. Logical data actually shows this. In countries where a lot of milk is consumed, like in Northern Europe, osteoporosis is more common than in Asian countries where traditionally hardly any dairy products are consumed. For a long time, osteoporosis was not an issue there at all. For healthy bones, vitamin D, exercise, and a plant-rich diet are much more important, but not milk. Now here's a bonus example straight from my practice, getting your vaccinations updated. And this very example from my own medical experience shows how long myths can persist. For decades, the recommendation was to regularly update tetanus and diphtheria vaccinations every 5 to 10 years. But with my patients, I always had a titer for tetanus checked first, and not once was the protection gone. On the contrary, there was always enough immunity for another 5, often even 10 years. And that's exactly what I've observed for over 35 years, maybe even longer. And in this way, I was able to avoid countless unnecessary vaccinations. And now there's a huge study that confirms exactly that. If you were adequately vaccinated in childhood, you usually have lifelong protection. So billions of booster shots would have been unnecessary. What I mean by that is that myths or recommendations that persist for a long time, even across generations, should always be questioned from time to time. Are they still true? Can we still stand by them? But one thing is clear. For example, with cold. Cold itself doesn't make you sick. Genes are not destiny. Dementias can be influenced, and milk and dairy products do not automatically provide protection. The bones themselves, just like the latest recommendations, can simply be outdated by new findings. I'm pretty sure you've heard one of these myths before, but I don't believe the last one. That makes it especially interesting, and that's why you should share this video. I think a lot of people would be grateful to know this.